speaking of, can it maintain the quality? The Last of Us 2, well, The Last of Us Part 2, is obviously the next continuation for The Last of Us HBO series, but The Last of Us Part 2 was kind of a big game. So thankfully, Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, the showrunners for The Last of Us TV series, have confirmed that The Last of Us Part 2 will be split into multiple seasons for the TV show. And I'm just going, good, because the first Last of Us is like maybe 10 or 11 hours. Like it's a good sized length game, but Last of Us 2 is like double the runtime of the first one. So, and it's also much denser. Like, as much as the first one could really just be boiled down to man takes surrogate daughter figure across the country and sees all the depressing stuff in the world. In the second one, without delving too much into spoilers, you get like other factions, you get some more government control in there, you get different groupings, as well as a bunch of new characters and character dynamics there's a lot of setup that needs to happen. It's just a much more dense game than the first one. Now, they've also said that they're going to make some changes to Last of Us Part 2. They're not going to be the changes people are hoping for, but then again, there was changes in the first season of Last of Us, and for the most part, I think most of them worked incredibly well. I know a lot of people have issues with Last of Us Part 2. I don't have nearly as much of an issue as other people, but I do still think that there's some problems with it, and it's more not from the stuff that happens in it, but how the stuff happens in it structurally. Things are drastically out of order, but the problem is the people that made the game seem to think if you have any criticism of the game, you're just a hater. And I'm going, no, you wrote yourself into multiple corners, but if you just write it this way and don't do Yoda speak here, it flows a lot better and you can get the results that you were kind of hoping for. So I think, given how this is going to be TV as opposed to game, I would not be surprised if Greg Mazin, the guy that did Chernobyl, one of the co-showrunners with Neil Druckmann, comes alongside Neil, who wrote the Part 2 for Last of Us, and goes, okay, I like what you're going for with the game, but here's how I would tweak it for television format, and here's how we can maximize it to be 2 or 3 seasons. So, Josh, as someone that hasn't played Last of Us Part 2 and kind of knows just only a little bit of it, does it make you excited that we're getting at least 2 seasons for Part 2? What are your general thoughts about it being split up?
I think that's the right call. It is, from my understanding, almost a double, if not triple in length game in comparison to the first one. Excuse me. But like, so to me, it makes sense. It's going to be a lot more dense. There's going to be a lot more going on. With that being said, I think the key event that is one of the reasons people hate the second game is going to happen at the end of next season. I don't think they should.
It should.
Yeah, I absolutely think it should. I think it is a big thing that you build to. What is interesting to me, and while the more and more I think about this in the context of like, okay, cool, so we're going into another, the second game that, like you said, has a bunch of factions, has a bunch of different governments set up throughout the country, let alone the world. To me, what's interesting is the thought from the Fireflies that having a cure for the cryptoid kind of virus, quote unquote, is the thing that's holding the world back. But like, I think for us, through season 1, we've seen that that's not necessarily true, that humanity is still very much in its own way. And I really hope that while I think the event still needs to happen, while I still think that Ellie coming to that conclusion in anger is still absolutely the right choice for her, I do hope that we explore the kind of emotions behind it in a much more less nuanced, well, maybe a more nuanced way of Joel not necessarily being wrong, but not being right. So
the other thing is, there's some big events that happen, but they happen towards the beginning of the game that I feel like
Hmm.
so much of the game gets hurt because that event happened so early that they have to go back and retroactively have a whole bunch of flashbacks to explain said events, as
Hmm.
opposed to if you're doing it in TV, they don't have to be flashbacks. They could just be a natural progression of a timeline instead.
Yes.
And then also, certain characters, one of their big flaws that people have with them is the Last of Us asks really big, dense, heavy questions about morality and about ethics for most characters. But there's one character that the game kind of wants you to forget that the standard applies to them as well. Of just like, no, no, no. You can't make us think this thing about this one character when in reality, this other character is doing the exact same thing, but you don't want us to think about the morals of what they are doing
Yeah. Yeah.
because we're supposed to be emotionally invested in both characters. And you can't do that if you're thinking about the morals of both characters. I'm just going, if we from the get go put all characters up for emotional evaluation, so to speak, of just like,
Hmm.
all of us are on equal footing. I think there's certain characters that are too protected by the creative group that have just like, I want to like this character. I see what you've got on paper is a good idea. But they need to be flawed, and they're not flawed in the game at all. And I think that
Yeah.
hurts the game. Um, but how the show has operated, at least for the first season, the characters are so incredibly well rounded, and they've made tweaks where necessary to make characters more well rounded, just more engaging characters. So I think the whole point of Last of Us 2 is seeing both sides to every situation.
Hmm.
And the first season did that incredibly well. So I have more faith in the creative team of Neil Druckmann, I think, is a good writer that no one could say no to for Last of Us 2 because of the success of Last of Us 1. But with him working with Mason, I think Mason can come alongside and be like, good ideas on paper. That's your first draft. Let's just iron out the kinks a little bit for your second
Yeah.
draft,
Yeah.
and we're on the right track. Again, Last of Us 2, I think, is a good narrative on paper. It's just how they organized it and how certain characters almost have the Rey Skywalker syndrome of being too
Mhm.
perfect and too good at given things, and we're not asked to evaluate them in the game. That I hope, and I think that will get remedied. I just think it's great that we're splitting this up because of how dense part 2 is, and certain events need to breathe more than they do. But also, if you think the first one shows us kind of peaking, and there might be optimism in the world and with our characters, that's The Last of Us for you.
I'm excited for the set for just the next season in general. I'm excited that we're getting at least 2 more seasons. I definitely, to Neil's credit, it is not an easy task to follow up the first game. To Neil's credit, he probably wrote that and did um, 2 or 3 drafts, solidified it, and then had to send it in, and then there was like 2 3 years of actual production work through the game and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if he caught all of the issues and wishes he could go back and change it, but because of how production works in video games, there's just there's a certain point in which it's too late. Sorry, you can't change it. So to Neil's credit, I wouldn't be surprised if he is aware of its flaws and is now
Oh, he
put in
gets
the
defensive
position.
about the game.
Yeah, so but we'll see what happens. I'm excited though.